Man Up, brought to you by Construction Professionals, a program dedicated to inspiring and helping men live lives of heroic virtue. Join Joe Stopulos every Monday at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. on Iowa Catholic Radio. And now, it's time to Man Up.
Man Up, also underwritten by McDonald Imaging Solutions. Welcome to Man Up on Iowa Catholic Radio, broadcasting from the Mercy One studio. Heard on 1150 AM, 88.5 FM, and 94.5 FM. Streaming online at iowacatholicradio.com and on the Iowa Catholic Radio app. Please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and wherever you get your podcasts. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. We're very involved in the social media world. Very excited today to have back on Dr. Peter Kreeft to discuss the book of Job in our Great Men of the Bible series. Let's start in prayer. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our safeguard against the wickedness and the snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray, and do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Moving right along, it's an interesting one today with the book of Job. Anyone who's ever had any experience with the book of Job knows that it's one of those timeless pieces of literature. As we talked about early on, the first episode of this series, there are many different types of literature, genres within the Bible. This one fits into the genre of poetry. The book of Job gives us many life lessons, and there's no one better out there, quite frankly, to talk about this than Dr. Peter Kreeft. I was really excited that he agreed to join us for this interview because I've heard him talk so much on this book. He has tremendous insights into the book and what we can get out of it. So excited to have him on the other side of the break. One note of not warning, but just to give you a note, the interview itself had some Bluetooth connections issues, so there's going to be a little bit of audio quality to worry about. But that said, listen closely to the words he's saying, and you'll get a lot out of the interview, I promise. So we're going to head to a short break, and when we return, we will have on Dr. Peter Kreeft to discuss the book of Job.
Thank you, Construction Professionals, for underwriting Man Up. Construction Professionals have been long supporters of Iowa Catholic Radio, and we've seen their work firsthand. It's very impressive. They do remodeling or new construction that is innovative, functional, and designing what you want. CPCustomHomes.com. I want to thank McDonald Imaging Solutions. They are sponsors of Man Up. If you were at the State Fair this year, they were the ones who provided the new tents and the Pope on a Stick fans that we used. McDonald Imaging Solutions is a family business with thousands of promotional items to choose from. They do things from labeling to marketing, printing, and provide all kinds of promotional products. Marty will personally help any business, big or small, to build their brand with corporate apparel and promo items. McDonald Imaging Solutions. Building brands, attracting new customers online at McDonaldImagingSolutions.com.
Thank you to Mercy College of Health Sciences, downtown Des Moines, for underwriting our show, The Uncommon Good, with me, Bo Bonner.
And I'm Bud Marr. A degree from Mercy College provides endless possibilities. Students have access to patients with complex medical conditions, state-of-the-art medical facilities, highly motivated healthcare professionals, and classroom professors that transform them into servant leaders.
You can start the programs in fall, spring, or summer. There are endless possibilities available online at mchs.edu/kwky.
Are you looking for a supportive, like-minded homeschooling community that values virtue and academics? Do you desire a Catholic peer group for your children that builds lasting relationships? Established in 2010, Catholic Schoolhouse Des Moines offers programs from preschool through high school using a classical model. Whether you are currently homeschooling or considering homeschooling, we can help. For more information, visit CatholicSchoolhouse.com. This message was brought to you by Savage Power.
My help comes from you. You're right here pulling me through. You carry.
Welcome to Man Up on Iowa Catholic Radio, broadcasting from the Mercy Live Up studios, heard on 1150 AM, 88.5 FM, and 94.5 FM. I am Joe Stopulos, and today I'm joined by Peter Kreeft. Dr. Kreeft is a professor of philosophy at Boston College and the King's College, and he's the author of numerous books. Last I checked, it was somewhere over 75, and as well as a popular writer of Christian philosophy, theology, and apologetics. His books include the Handbook of Christian Apologetics, the Summa of the Summa, Prayer for Beginners, and many other great works. Today he is joining us to discuss the topic of great men in the Old Testament, and today he's going to be talking about Job. Dr. Kreeft, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I wanted you for this episode as I was kind of going through great men of the Bible, and I wanted to pick out Job. And the reason you came to mind is a few months ago, I read a couple of C.S. Lewis books. One was The Problem of Pain, and one was Till We Have Faces. And after reading them, I listened to a couple talks that you had given on those books, and you regularly referenced the book of Job throughout those talks, and discovered that you'd kind of gleaned a lot of insight out of the book of Job, and thought you'd be perfect to help us learn more about Job and what we can learn from him. So we'll start with that. Obviously, a lot of tie-ins with C.S. Lewis and the book of Job, but can you start us with maybe a background on the book and how it fits into the Bible?
Well, in a sense, it's like the book of Ecclesiastes because it questions the whole of the faith of God's chosen people, the Jews. If there is a God who is good and moral and just, then why do the righteous suffer? A just God and an apparently unjust world don't seem to fit together. And that's one of Ecclesiastes' arguments, too. In Ecclesiastes, we have just a philosopher sitting back and speculating about it, and at least the first part of the book concludes that vanity of vanities all is vanity. And only in the last few verses do we get the answer, either from the original author or maybe from a second author. In Job, we live the problem and the solution rather than just think it. So the answer is not theoretically satisfying at the end of the book of Job. God doesn't explain things to Job. He asks questions, but Job is satisfied. So put those two books together, and you get a kind of philosophical and personal questioning of the faith and an answer.
So the book of Job itself fits in from a time I've seen many different interpretations of the timing. Where would you throw it in? I've got it right after Joseph, maybe around the time of Moses. As far as dating it, would you throw it much later than that, or much earlier than that, I should say?
I don't have the authority to answer that
okay,
question.
So you're
I'm not a scripture scholar. I am told that it's a very old book and that it probably has layers in it, maybe as many as 3 layers, because the story itself, the narrative, is the first few and last few chapters, and then the poetry, which takes up most of the middle part, might be another layer, and then the speeches of Elihu, the fourth speaker, seems to be added on later. It fits together nicely, but the oldest part of it probably goes back, I don't know, at least 1008 BC.
Yeah, so as we're talking about trying to work through the Bible, one of the things to think about is this book shows up right after Maccabees. So Maccabees in your timeline is going to be bumping up right against Jesus, the last, chronologically, one of the last books in the Old Testament. And then when you're looking through the Bible, the book of Job shows up. So again, this is, as you're learning the Bible, understand that Job is actually going to be placed closer to the front of the Bible as far as timeline goes, but it's not a narrative book. It doesn't follow the story of the history of Israel. So we show up, and as far as genre goes, as you mentioned, it's a book of poetry, right? So how are we supposed to interpret poetry in the fact that this is not a salvation, this is not part of the story of Israel, it's something completely different. And how does that fit into the Bible?
Well, Judaism and Christianity, unlike all other religions, are about history, about God's actions in history. Our scriptures include 3 kinds of books. Those narratives, which are central, then philosophical and theological reflections on the narratives, which is the wisdom literature, and then the books of prophecy. So this is in the middle. This is a piece of wisdom literature, and it presupposes the narrative. It presupposes the events of salvation history, the Exodus, for instance, or the creation story.
I got the book open here to the first chapter of Job, and I think this is important for people. There's a lot of our listeners who maybe haven't experienced Job, they know of him, but the story itself is rich and compelling. I think one of the interesting things, again, about the Bible in general is that here's a piece of poetry, and if you were to line up some of the greatest pieces of literature and poetry in the world, this is going to fall into that. Whether it's secular,
the all-time classic about the problem of evil.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And it is people. It would go up against any of the great works of literature of all time, and it just so happens that it's in the Bible. And it says there's a man from the land of Oz. His name is Job, and the man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. And then it talks about everything that was given to him, sons and daughters and sheep and thousands of camel. And on and on and on, and they would hold feasts and parties. And then after the course of the day, after the parties, and when the feasts had run their course, Job would send and sanctify them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." And thus Job did continually. So a man who was righteous, blameless, upright, was blessed beyond, with material and familial blessings. And
So he had both kinds of good. He had the good that comes from him, moral holiness, and the good that comes to him, good fortune. And in a just world, those two things fit together.
and
So the situation is set up perfectly. And then it's upset by Job losing all of his goods, but not his moral character.
so then Satan decides to enter the equation here, and Satan it basically approaches God, right, and says, "Hey, I bet you I can tempt anyone. I can get anyone to turn away from you." And God says, "No, I've got this. There's Job, this man named Job, and Job, no matter what happens to him, he will stick with me." And the story kind of takes off from there. And I'll let you. I mean, how do you want to elaborate upon the conversations between Satan and God?
Well, the first thing to notice is that Satan has to ask God permission, and God doesn't have to grant it. So God's in control all the time. It's not as if God and Satan are two card players across the table, each with an equal chance of winning. I mean, God is like the New England Patriots, and everybody else is like the Devils. Nobody else has got a chance.
I'm a Packers fan, and I resent that sentiment. But anyway, unfortunately, I can't argue with you right now on that.
And then Satan's challenge is that Job is not really a holy man. He's an egotist. He's a pragmatist. God's like Santa Claus. He comes down his chimney with presents every Christmas, and that's the only reason that Job loves him. So Satan says, if you come down his chimney without presents this Christmas, he'll stop loving you. Mm-hmm. And God says, I know he won't. And it's not for Satan's sake that God allows the test, nor for God's sake, because God knows everything. It must be for Job's sake. So once you believe in that God that revealed himself to the Jews, the only possible interpretation of those first few chapters is that God is performing an experiment out of love for Job. This really doesn't seem that way. It seems as if Job is getting the stick, but he's really getting a lesson in wisdom and holiness, and at the end, he's happier than he was at the beginning.
Yeah, so the first two chapters there, it says how great of a man he was and how blessed he was, and then the conversation happens between Satan and God, and then the first attempt, or the first test, really, is that he loses all of his possessions. He loses all of his possessions, and he does not curse God. He stays steadfast, and then Satan says, "Well, if you take away his health, then he'll curse you." And then Satan shows up and afflicts him with tons of sores in chapter 2, and Job continues to stay steadfast in his love of God. What can we glean from those first two tests?
Well, the temptations come in levels. The easiest ones to overcome, if you have any wisdom at all, is ones that don't touch you, but just touch the stuff that you have, because the stuff that you have isn't you, unless you're an idolater. But since your body is you, since the Jews, unlike the Greeks, had a very high view of the human body, it wasn't just a temporary house that pure spirit sits in. It's you. So when God allows Satan to afflict Job's body, that's a much more difficult temptation to overcome. And the fact that Job doesn't curse God even then, although he does curse the day of his birth, that's very impressive. So that the author's characterization of Job as a righteous and holy man who fears God and turns away from evil is repeated by God himself to the devil, word for word. So we know that's true. The interpretation of Job that contradicts that can't possibly be right. And so Job's a good man, and yet the temptations are almost impossible to overcome, and Job just barely makes it.
Yeah, and at the end of that second chapter, his wife turns to him and says, "Do you still hold fast to your integrity, curse God, and die?" So his wife now turns away from him as well, to add insult to injury.
Yep. And his three friends, he's got nothing.
That's the bulk of the story. So for people who are not familiar with it, basically from chapters 3 until chapters 38, it is his three friends basically walking through, explaining to him without very little sympathy, why God has done what He's done.
There's great humor in the characterization of the three friends. With friends like that, who needs enemies? They're called comforters, but they're Job's main torture because he has no friends left. With friends like that who blame Job and basically are cursing Job, although Job refuses to curse them or God. With friends like that, you've got nothing left.
And this goes on, and it's back and forth. So basically, the rest of the story up until chapter 38 is one of his friends speaks, Job's response. One of his friends speaks, Job's response. That happens 6 times, basically. And then a new character, as you mentioned, shows up. Oh, what chapter is that? That is in chapter 32. Elihu shows up and rebukes his friends and addresses Job. What do you make of Elihu showing up on the scene?
I'm not sure. Does it add to the story? I suppose so. Elihu was a little wiser than the three friends. Still not wholly wise. God doesn't mention him at the end when God shows up and says the three friends are wrong, they must sacrifice. Job is right. So I guess that's a kind of a mediating position.
Mm-hmm.
He's wise. He gets his wisdom not from authority, from books, from other people. He gets his wisdom from experience, even a mystical experience. So there's something profoundly true about what Elihu says.
And one of the things I love the most about this book is how it kind of builds to this climax. So it builds and builds and builds, and there's this climax at chapter 38, and it says, "Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind." So it's been a lot of speculation this whole time of why this all happened to Job.
The climax is also a climax of the humor. Just as it's very ironic for the author to call Job's three so-called friends his comforters, so it's ironic to say that God gives Job an answer, because God does not answer a single one of Job's very good and passionate questions.
Yeah.
All he does is ask questions. Who are you? I didn't notice you helping me to design the world. Were you there with the angels when they sang together? Oh, no? Really? So God's sermon to Job is really a longer and poetic version of my favorite sermon of all time. I have ADD, so I get bored very easily, so I like short sermons. And this is the shortest sermon I ever heard. God himself preached it to a medieval mystic named St. Catherine. And he said, I'm going to summarize all of divine revelation in 4 words. I'm God, you're not.
Yeah. Perfect.
That's what Job learns, who God is and who he is. He's not God.
And so much of the literature that you had mentioned, that I talked about earlier with the problem of pain, until we have faces, and just a lot of C.S. Lewis in general comes down to that. And that is the lasting, the reason this is such a lasting work and why it's so important is because of that. So I'll give our listeners a taste. Again, this is Job 38. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. Who is it that darkness counsels by words without knowledge? Gird up your loins like a man. I will question you, and you shall declare to me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding, who determines its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched out the line upon it? On what was its basin sunk? And it goes on from there. And to your point, I mean, God doesn't actually answer the question. He just continues to say, were you there when I created the clouds? Have you ever made a rainstorm, et cetera, et cetera?
And now Job has to answer God's question, and his answer is perfect. I know who I am. I'm the man who had these empty-headed words. I'm a fool. And I know who you are. You're God. You have all the answers.
Yeah,
and those are the two things we need to know, who we are and who God is, because those are the only two persons that we can never, ever escape or avoid for a single second in this life or in the next.
It's like, obviously, on C.S. Lewis, Till We Have Faces, where he curses the gods, and at the end she realizes, okay, yep, I'm nothing. This is all my fault. And it also gets to the problem of pain. So we talk about the problem of evil. And I think that's one of the other underlying themes of this book is that why do bad things happen to good people? And I think this book, more so than anything else, can give us reasons for that. I mean, who are we when we're in pain? The pain, it happens to everybody, the best of us.
It's astonishingly ironic. That is, it doesn't square with appearances. It's very different than what it appears to be. The ultimate answer to the question, why does God allow the righteous to suffer, is because he loves them, and he does the very best thing for them. In other words, the ultimate interpretation of Job is Romans 8:28. All things work together for good for those who love God.
Mm-hmm.
Even the worst things. Even what Job is sitting on, which the old King James Bible literally translates as a dung heap. It's a 4-letter word.
So, what are, as men in 2019, what are the main things that we can learn from the witness of Job?
Trust God. He's the only game in town. You're not going to understand everything. Understanding isn't the most important thing. Fidelity is.
When we get to the end, God has then, Job agrees with God, and as you mentioned, and God basically brings him back more so than where he was before, correct?
Right. But before he gets his stuff back, his possessions, his children, he gets God. And that's enough for him, because he says, I had heard about you by the hearing of the ear. In other words, Job had believed in God. He knew him secondhand. Now, Job sees God face to face. He says, now I see you, and I'm satisfied. So Job gets a foretaste of heaven. The Jews believe that no man could see God's face and live. There are two exceptions to that, Moses and
Job. There's so many good one-liners that Job has that, again, that kind of stood the test of time. And one would be the first one, Job 1:20. He loses. This is after he's lost all of his children. He's lost his cattle and whatnot. And says, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." So again, when we're facing those tough times, we can look to Job and say, this is the correct response. And then to your point at the end there, I'll quote it. This is 42. This is Job 42, verses 4-6. "Hear and I will speak. I will question you and declare to you, and you declare to me. And then, I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I despise myself, and I repent in dust and ashes." That, to me, sums up the story of Job and what we, as men living today, again, just having that faith and understanding that no matter what we're going through, God is God. We're not God. I think it takes some humility, and to me, that's the story of Job. What are any other themes that we should take from this?
It's amazing how much God loves his severely brain-damaged children. We keep forgetting the second part of that sermon, that we're not God. He has to keep reminding us. As C.S. Lewis says in The Problem of Pain, pain is God's megaphone to arouse a dull world.
Any books you'd recommend for our listeners on the subject of Job, or maybe it's the problem of pain? I'm about to say the word, the problem of pain. Books you'd recommend for them to dive deeper into the subject?
Well, a much more personal take by Lewis himself on the problem of pain is his little diary, A Grief Observed, which he wrote after his wife died.
Yep.
And that's a very Job-like experience, and it's an utterly honest and utterly faithful and, difficult, harrowing book, but the best book I know to give to someone who's grieving. All
right, so Grief Observed by C.S. Lewis, A Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis, Until We Have Faces by C.S. Lewis. All of those are going to come recommended if you want to dive deeper into the truths that are found in the book of Job. Dr. Kreeft, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're very welcome. God bless you.
We're going to head to a short break, and we'll be back in just a minute.
Thank you to Mercy One for their support of Iowa Catholic Radio. From the cardiovascular experts at the Iowa Heart Center to the pediatric services of Mercy Children's Hospital and Clinics, Mercy provides complete care for Central Iowa's adults and children with more than 50 primary care and specialty clinics in the Des Moines area. Find a convenient Mercy One location near you. Online at mercydesmoines.org.
Vitae Family Care is part of the Iowa Catholic Radio family. Pro-life physician Greg McKernan, a DO, has practiced for 27 years, seeing patients of all ages with just about every kind of need. Dr. McKernan lives his faith as a physician and is trained in NAPRO technology, allowing him to diagnose and treat many female conditions and even markedly reduce the occurrence of a miscarriage. VitaeFamilyCare.com. Remember, Vitae is Latin for life.
My help comes from you. You're right
Welcome to Man Up on Iowa Catholic Radio. My thanks again to Dr. Peter Kreeft. The book of Job falls somewhere around the patriarchs as far as timeline goes, so we thought it'd be a good fit to stick the book of Job in between Genesis and Exodus. Now we're going to move next week into the book of Exodus, and we will have the next 2 episodes will be on Moses. It's really difficult to try to cover Moses in 1 or 2 episodes, quite frankly. He covers 4 books of the Bible, but we'll have 2 episodes dedicated to the life of Moses and what we can learn from Moses. Obviously, anyone going through Exodus 90 right now has seen the work of Moses through those books, but again, similar to Genesis, how important those books were for the foundation of our church, so are the next 4 books of the Bible. Specifically the story of Exodus. So really excited next week to jump into the book of Exodus and the story of Moses. Thank you again for joining us on Iowa Catholic Radio on Man Up. I am Joe Stopulos. It's time to man up.
Man Up, inspiring men to live out their call to holiness with Joe Stopulos. Heard Mondays at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. on Iowa Catholic Radio. Brought to you by Construction Professionals.
Man Up, also underwritten by McDonald Imaging Solutions.